Which brings us to the oh so contentious topic of mouthpiece pressure. My take on pressure and my experience working with a lot of students is that most of the time, and I mean like almost all of the time, telling a student to use less mouthpiece pressure will harm their development because they become so concerned about that particular aspect of technique that they stop allowing the real trumpet guru to stay in the room. And again, the real trumpet guru, those two things: resonant sound, ease of response. You want that to guide every single thing that you do in your practice and with your students. If it sounds better, it is. And if it sounds easier and if it feels easier to the student, that's the direction to be going together in your relationship as you move down this path side by side as trumpeters on this amazing journey. For me, I actually more often than not, that's not to say all the time, but more often than not, I actually need to give my students permission to use more pressure. Because what essentially has to happen is we have to isolate the vibrations that are happening inside the mouthpiece from the rest of the face. If I don't use enough pressure to isolate those vibrations, then things go bonkers. The other piece of the puzzle about why a certain amount of mouthpiece pressure is necessary is an oft talked about concept in the Reinhardt system called tracking. First off, I'm so not a Reinhardt expert, and there are amazing Reinhardt experts out there who you can get a lot more information about this. There is something really helpful about understanding this idea of tracking, and it does relate to a certain extent to mouthpiece pressure. So tracking is this idea that the aperture will actually move, it will slide slightly on the teeth as a single unit connected to our mouthpiece when we go up or down. So if you look really closely as I go up and down, the mouthpiece actually has to slightly, very as minimally as possible, has to track with the aperture on the teeth to produce the angle of air that supports the change in register. And mouthpiece pressure is a necessary part of allowing the aperture to track. It'll usually move up and down, but it could move diagonally as you go up and down or straight up and down. It's different for different people, and that whole Reinhardt system literally documents the different types of embouchures and tracking, and it's a whole universe that I only know a teeny bit about. But being aware that needs to happen can inform our mouthpiece pressure. There has to be enough for that to move as a unit. If you're trying to play the horn like that, where you haven't isolated the vibrations inside the mouthpiece because there's not enough pressure to do that, and you don't have enough pressure to allow the aperture to track slightly up and down on the teeth, there has to be enough for that to happen. Period. The end. There may be players who don't realize they're doing that, but there aren't players who don't track, to my knowledge. I want to be super clear that when I talk about tracking, I'm not talking about the mouthpiece moving on top of the face. Rather, the mouthpiece and the lips are sealed together. Definitely not sliding the mouthpiece around ever. The contact points between the face and the mouthpiece should always remain the same. Finally, the third piece of the mouthpiece pressure puzzles is a little bit of wisdom from Wiff. I will definitely link to Wiff's book in the description. He has this brilliant phrase he uses for mouthpiece pressure is to keep the, quote, same mouthpiece connection all the time. I love the idea of using the word connection, mouthpiece connection, as opposed to mouthpiece pressure. I think that is a stroke of teaching genius that Wiff came up with there, or whoever he got it from. But the idea of keeping the same mouthpiece connection is literally that whole unit of the way that the mouthpiece interacts with our embouchure, the way we receive it, its connection, the way it connects the lips to the bone structure in our face. I think that idea of connection is nothing short of brilliant. And when we're moving around on the horn, I'm trying to keep that same mouthpiece connection in all registers. Back in the 90s, they did a huge study, but basically they took a group of no pressure players and they took a group of pressure players, and they actually measured the amount of mouthpiece pressure that they were using to play. And in fact, the people who believed that they were playing with no pressure played with more mouthpiece pressure than the people who believed they were using mouthpiece pressure. That's not to say that low pressure exercises can't help us develop the network of muscles that we use to play. I was really fortunate that one of my primary mentors, Dave Hickman, he had a beautiful core philosophy, which was that if the method exists, there's probably value in it. So he had a very sort of universalist approach to looking for the good in every trumpet method. And so this is not me getting into the argument over whether or not no pressure or low pressure or high pressure playing is right or wrong. Rather, that we want to get curious about those approaches and find the approaches that get us closer to our real trumpet guru, which is a more resonant sound and an easier response. Now we move to talking about setting up the lips. Just a reminder, we're talking about separate pieces, but they are not separate. They all they all interact in a way that produces healthy trumpet playing, right? One of the most helpful descriptions of a healthy embouchure that I've ever heard, I learned from Carlos Benito, the first trumpet in the Spanish brass quintet. And Carlos had a teacher who described the embouchure to him this way. He said that a healthy embouchure is strength outside the mouthpiece and freedom inside the mouthpiece. So strength and freedom. I feel like trumpet playing is almost always pairs of opposites. It's like all paradox. It's all these pairs of opposites that shouldn't work together but do. So it's really, playing the trumpet is always like this, right? Every aspect of it, whether it's the breath, whether it's the embouchure, it doesn't matter. It's always these pairs of opposites that are dancing together in ways that shouldn't work but do. And so in terms of the embouchure, that's such a lovely model. So when we say strength, we literally mean the network of muscles all the way from the corner of the nose down to the tip of the jaw and out along the teeth. The higher that I go, absolutely, I will need this firmness outside the mouthpiece. This entire network will need to increase. It absolutely will need to increase in firmness in order to allow things to happen the way that they need to happen. And what's the goal is to have what's happening inside the mouthpiece be as free as is absolutely possible. So let's talk about what's happening inside the mouthpiece a little bit and that freedom. It's really, really crucial to understand, first off, that the aperture, the point, the tip of the lip needs to be as together as possible. And as trumpet players, we need to be playing in a way where we experience the vibration of that vibrating column of air on the outer tissue of the lip. In my experience, anytime a student or myself has allowed my embouchure to move to vibrating on the inner membrane of the lip, I am setting myself up for problems. And I know that there are incredible artists who actually intentionally do that. I would like to posit very respectfully that those people are exceptions to what works for the vast majority of us. So, what's inside the mouthpiece, the tip of our lip, the aperture is going to be as together as it possibly can be. It's going to be, we're going to experience the vibrations of the vibrating column of air on the outer tissue of the lip. Very important to be aware that, in fact, we are not buzzing inside our mouthpiece when we play the trumpet. What we experience or perceive as a buzz is, in fact, a standing wave interacting. It's the vibration of the airstream bouncing back and forth between the lip and the cup of the mouthpiece. So just be aware that we're not trying to buzz the lips when we play. If I buzz the lips when I play, that's the sound I get. So what I want to do instead is allow that vibrating column of air to move through and part the aperture. And so, but what's happening inside? Tip of the lip as together as possible. And on the outer tissue, don't let yourself move to vibrating on the inner membrane of the lip. There is a really common pitfall that I see my students falling into and that I fell into for a really long time as a player. As I was working on developing an embouchure where the lips were truly together. And that pitfall was that I thought that that meant that I needed to bring the upper lip down more to have the lips come together. For most of us, that's just working against our physiology. Of course, there are different upper lip lengths that could change this completely. For most of us, the thing that's going to bring the lips together so that they're ready to respond is actually bringing the lower lip up, because it's attached to the jaw. And when the jaw comes up and the lower lip comes up and we create this nice flat setup to play, it's bringing it up rather than trying to get the upper lip to come down. I've had some success with students asking them to get down in the mouthpiece, but in general, if they're already opening too much, if they're opening their teeth too much and then they get down, they just open more. And it gets into this cycle where they end up doing things that can damage them. Another really common pitfall in learning to have the lips be together inside the mouthpiece to play is for students to add extra tension to the center of the lip when they go to play. For most of us, that doesn't help. It ends up restricting and setting up a push and pull between the exhale and the embouchure. So one of the things that has worked for several of my students is inviting them to consider that the instinct to increase the overall firmness in the setup is an accurate instinct, but we don't want to do it here in the center. I invite them to consider transferring that extra firmness out to the rest of the setup. So they will feel that firmness increasing here while they keep the middle free and ready to vibrate. So what I'll do is demonstrate extra tension at the tip of the lip inside the mouthpiece and let you hear that sound. And then I will demonstrate transferring that tension out so that this can free up to play inside, so that there's freedom inside the mouthpiece. So here's extra tension at the tip of the lip. Now I'm going to transfer that extra firmness out where I want it so that I can free up the middle. supple, elastic, free, buoyant. Those kinds of words might get us closer to understanding the sensation of playing with that freedom inside the mouthpiece that's really together. And finally, just like a concluding warning and reminder, if you're anything like me, even though learning these things has been tremendously helpful, knowing about them, it can get really tempting to start to try and control these pieces as though they were the stimulus for your trumpet playing. And they really aren't. So be really careful not to fall for that trap, which I fall for all the time still, where I start realizing that I'm placing my conscious awareness and attention on controlling these physical parts. Really, the purpose of knowing about all of these physical parts and how they interact with each other is to recognize it when it happens. That's I think for most of us is a more helpful way to conceive of this understanding about the embouchure. Get curious about finding the stimuli that allow those mechanisms to happen on their own. Now that said, just a heads up, the next episode is going to be really nuts and bolts exercises that will help you experience what all of this stuff we just talked about means, really. And so look for that in coming weeks.